Hello and welcome to another episode of the Petey Performance Podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is a conversation with Shane Lehane, who is an athletic development coach here at the Sydney Swans, where we had the privilege of recording today. We talked a lot about systems thinking. It was quite a deep and philosophical conversation about systems thinking and how that applies to team sport. It's something that Shane has been presenting on for the ASCA and for Play Labs of late. And it's something that he has studied extensively and has an extensive knowledge around. So I was really happy to pick his brain on the topic. We went really deep on it. It's going to apply really well to any coach working in team sport, any athlete that's interested in understanding the role of an athletic development coach nowadays in team sport, especially at an elite level. We talked about his role as an athletic development coach initially with Leicester Tigers, then with Melbourne Rebels, and how he now views the role in a different way with Sydney Swans than what he did back then all those years ago, 18 years ago to be precise. So he has so much experience. It was great to pick his brain. This is a great episode. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, please remember to like it, share it, and send it. Shane.
Peter.
Welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Second time out here in the Swans. First Irish coach that I've spoke to since I've landed on the podcast. How's Australia going?
Mate, it's great. Love it. This is into my 8th year here now. Became a citizen a couple of years ago, so very much home at this stage. And I love being over here. Great place to live, great sporting culture, and fortunate to be working at a great organisation too. So life's good.
You just said there's a lot of Irish over here. Why do you think it is that there's so many Irish coaches specifically out in Australia? Why do we thrive out here?
Yeah, there's a lot of Irish coaches, not in Ireland, to be honest. I guess if you look at I know when I was coming up through, I probably didn't even see kind of strength conditioning, sports science, roles in professional sport as a viable career, really, when I was coming up. Now I know that's changed a lot as the sporting landscape has shifted in Ireland too. But I guess the reality is there's quite a lot of talented and dedicated practitioners in Ireland and probably not enough jobs. But I think we're seeing people excel. There's a lot out here in Australia, but across the globe too. I know Connor Daly out with Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA. We've got Kevin White, who's had a performance down here at North Melbourne. Steve Kelly heads up the AFLW women's program here at the Swan. So, there's someone connected me on LinkedIn the other day who's heading up sports science at Juventus, a guy from Ireland as well. You think, guys are all over the place. I guess it's a big global market, but maybe less opportunities at home.
So obviously, people are leaving because there's opportunities abroad, as you said, and opportunities are limited at home. But do you believe that Irish coaches offer something different to, you can only probably speak for Australian coaches here, is there a differing perspective, or do we learn anything different, or is it just good coaches get good jobs?
I think good coaches get good jobs. I do think, providing external reference is always a positive. Obviously we grow up with our own native games and our own sporting culture, even how the climate shapes how we engage and interact with sport when we're growing up. And I guess it's still a relatively small country, but as a result of that, we got people leaving, and we're providing external reference to the environments that we're going into, maybe a different upbringing. I also think a bit of a stereotypical overview, but I do think Irish people, Irish practitioners, Irish coaches are willing. There's a good work culture, I reckon, in the Irish culture, and different. Not that the Australian work culture is lazy in any way, but when it's beating down sunshine and it's 35 degrees plus every day, you're more inclined to spend your time down on the beach and being outside. Whereas maybe when you're spending 70-80% of your year in the pouring rain, maybe that encourages you more to be perhaps more engaged in the hard work and the work progressions, which maybe aids Irish coaches as well.
Did you find any difference in terms of use of language when you came out, and was there any actual barrier, even though we're both speaking English, some of the terms that we might use as coaches and the cues that we might use might not land on Australian athletes and players or coaches as well?
I don't know about phrases that jump to mind, but definitely I would say the speed of how we talk is, I know when I get I've been away from Ireland now a long time. This is my 18th year living away from home, and between living in the UK for 10 years and being over here, I think the pace at which I speak is definitely slowed. But I know when I get excited, or if I spent a bit of time around, we've had a couple of Irish players, and there's obviously Julian Paris in the AFLW program and Steve Kelly. If I'm conversing with them for a period of time, I find that I drop back into speaking 1,000 miles an hour. So there's probably some nuances in terminology and slang, but I reckon the pace of how we speak back home is probably the major one.
Do you think moving abroad and having to slow down the speed at which you're delivering information has benefited your coaching?
Well, it certainly means you need to be clear in what you're saying and concise in what you're saying. So I think that's probably a positive, all right.
So you've been doing a bit of a tour of late, a presentation tour that we were speaking about off air, and you've been talking about systems thinking and how it applies to team sport. If you were to give a synopsis to the layperson that's not even involved in sports performance, how would you explain systems thinking now without just putting on the video that you put on in the presentation I watched to deliver the information for you?
I guess just to preface that part of just on the presentation tour, I guess, in the past I've always been maybe a little bit reluctant to, stand up in front of people and discuss my ideas. It's probably been a bit of nervousness and apprehension there. But in the last few years in particular, I guess, since I've re-engaged in the academic process and gone back to uni, and a big part of the academic process is presenting your ideas, being open to criticism, and then that criticism helping to evolve your thought process. So that definitely has spurred or encouraged me to kind of go up and be presenting a little bit more. And just coincidentally, I guess I've been asked or invited to present on some of these things. I guess I've been through my own experience, I've become interested in the role of the strength and conditioning coach or athletic performance coach in the team sports setting, and my own experiences and journey have shaped my thought process and how I view the role, and then that's fed into doing some academic work in that space. And I guess one of the key kind of theories that supports how I view the role is this concept of systems thinking. And I guess systems thinking can be summarized as in a team sports setting, in an organization, in a system, that the performance of that system is not the sum of its individual components, but the interaction between them. So if we take an organization or a team and say you're a strength conditioning coach managing the physical dimension of that it's not about maximizing the physical dimension, but about optimizing it in the presence of other inputs, technical, tactical, psychological, the social environment which they're working in. I guess the evolution of my kind of approach to the role is one from being more reductionist to being almost entirely concerned with the maximizing of physical capabilities, to one who views the role as being almost an assistant coach within the team sports setting with an expertise in managing the physical dimension in the presence of these other inputs. And so what that looks like oftentimes is, as I mentioned, not necessarily, and maybe it is, but identifying priorities and maybe not always seeking to maximize those physical components, but try and understand where physical performance fits in the hierarchy of needs in the organization and team that you're working in, how programming considerations that you have responsibility for influence other parts of the program and influence the athlete and how they interact. I guess that's the premise of systems thinking, that it's focused on the interdependency of different components and the relationships between different components, rather than viewing things in silos and maximizing them in the kind of individual state.
So obviously your thought process around it has become more systemized through the studies, But was that something that you noticed through the 18 years in the industry anyway, that at the start when you went in as a young coach, you potentially saw your role as very reductionist and potentially appraised far more relevance or importance to your role than you do now? Even though you still do have a very important role, but obviously in terms of the bigger picture, everybody has an important role.
Yeah, I think the role is, the way I view the role and the importance of the role is in supporting the team and organizational goals. That is the role. And when you're making subsequent decisions then in terms of programming or applying physical stimuli, that it's in consideration of what the team needs and the organization needs. I want to think back to my early career. I think the field has evolved a fair bit. So I've been in probably in the middle part of my career, but I think the field has evolved anyway to be maybe more have greater appreciation of the whole. But I know when I think back to my early career, it was quite reductionist. I think my first role was at Leicester, and we had a very progressive department at the time, and this is 14 years ago now. It's a long time ago. But we kind of had a department mantra of, we build the engine, the coaches tune it. And essentially that translated to, we maximize and, develop their physical capacities, and then we put them on the rugby field at the time, and the coaches are in charge tuning it. Through a process of experience and evolution of thought, and I'm sure this is true of my colleagues who were back at Leicester back in that day too, I think we become as an industry probably more appreciative of the impact on the whole, and how the decisions you make impact overall system performance, team performance, rather than being more reductionist and being only concerned with maximizing your area.
There are still a lot of coaches that do solely focus on the physical though, and on maximizing those physical outputs.
There's I think that's the nature of, not to get too technical on this, but the nature of sport and exercise science or strength conditioning is it's being shaped by what's called in the academic world by a positivist paradigm. And positivism is essentially only that which can be mathematically or scientifically proven is true. And that's the way the sports science and strength conditioning field has evolved, essentially to be an empirical, evidence-based practice. The issue with that, or one of the concerns of that, is when you go into a team or an organization, is that's a complex social system. You've got lots of stakeholders, you've got players, you've got GMs, coaches, fans, board members, who all have opinions and views on what will shift the needle from a team performance perspective. And I said the way we've been educated, or the way the field is generally educated, is to, in this kind of scientific method, when in actual fact it's about applying those scientific principles or those empirical principles in this kind of complex social structure. It sounds a bit deep, but it's like we all recognize anyway. You take those kind of scientific principles and you put it in reality. You can't just take the textbook and apply it on the field or in the gym. You have to manage the nuances of the environment. So when I look back at my early career, I think I spent a lot of time on really like the nuances of training science and delving deep into physiology and biomechanics, etc. And I do actually think that's an important process to go through. Necessary. You need to understand those things. You can't just be wing it, and you need to base your decisions on some exactly, and some empirical evidence and what's based on the research, and that still forms a massive part of what I do now. That's that disciplinary knowledge is really important, but also those more tacit skills of engaging stakeholders, understanding what the priorities are, understanding that even though the job title is the same, the role, the actual functional role might be different depending on the organization you're working with and what the priorities are at that time. I think probably starting in that position of being, physiology focused and training science focused, and viewing that's the role, that's probably an important foundational component to go through, and not being dismissive of it. It still forms a large part of what I do, but then also I think as you start to spend more time in the environments, and maybe as roles expand and you're engaging more stakeholders, you kind of get an appreciation that it's not just one way to do this. There's there's a few things at play here. There's a few methodologies. There's a few things. There's more than a few there. There's loads. It's unquantifiable, really, the amount of inputs that are coming in and and influencing what you're doing. And you start to gain more of an appreciation of what those might be and the interrelationship between those things.
Has the studies influenced at all how you interact with your staff now? Do you interact with fellow staff members or players and other coaches differently than you did before? Not that it was a eureka moment, but before you began to understand systems thinking and how the whole is impacted by everything, not just one thing.
I think that process was starting anyway. Something like becoming aware of a concept of systems thinking has more put something, maybe some sort of formal structure around some of the processes I was going through anyway. Particularly when I spent time so I started my career at a very successful, well-resourced organisation in Leicester Tigers to Melbourne Rebels, which was very much kind of a new team in the competition, startup, perhaps a little bit under-resourced in terms of players and staff and player quality. And what I realised when I went into that environment is that you couldn't just apply the same principles from one organisation. And even though the game's the same, the priorities and the demands are actually different. So I think I was learning that lesson the hard way anyway through my early years in the Melbourne Rebels, and realising that I needed to have a greater appreciation of the whole and the interaction of these inputs rather than just worrying about my own role. And then the delving into that thought process is probably what revealed the systems thinking concept to me, and then that's helped shape my thinking as well. In terms of dealing with staff, it definitely. I know when I arrived at Melbourne Rebels, I came in. I was high on the Dunning-Kruger effect at the time. Came in hot. Yeah, I'd been in a very successful environment. My first 6 years in pro sport were 4 grand finals and 2 semi-finals. I thought I knew all the answers. Then I came into Melbourne Rebels, kicked down the door, was a bit dismissive of probably some of the practice that had gone before me, without appreciating the environment or the context in which those people were operating. And then, if I'm honest, I was probably relatively lucky to get through my first 12 months. I was being pretty hard and aggressive in my area, and I'm not sure if that was complementing what we were trying to do as an organisation. I was what I would describe myself in that period as being a well-intentioned reductionist. I was thinking if I maximise my area, then that would have a positive effect on performance, instead of going the other way and trying to identify what are the actual needs and demands and goals and supporting that. So yeah, has it shaped how I manage staff? Both people that I work with in my own departments and coaches, I definitely have moved away from having what I would describe as a technical philosophy of how I think we need to train players, and more of a philosophy in terms of I'm interested in understanding, what are the needs and goals of this organisation? How are we trying to play the game? What's the tactical vision? What are the technical actions that underpin that tactical vision? Every technical action has an underpinning physical component. When we understand the tactical vision and the technical actions, if we know we can start to support some of the physical components that support that, understanding where athletic performance or athletic development sits in the hierarchy of needs. And that, as I said, that might differ between organisations. I think we're at
or at phases of the season.
Or phases of seasons, and the individual athlete and the team and the phase of season. So yeah, it's I guess I can realize that the role is just more nuanced than probably what I first determined, yeah.
So it sounds like your definition for an athletic development coach or a strength and conditioning coach has potentially changed a lot or evolved as time has gone on.
Yeah, I think it's semantics really, but I think even the field is kind of known as strength and conditioning, but even that title is quite reductionist. It thinks that there's 2 things to worry about essentially, and I get the piss taken out of me here by some of my colleagues, but I was adamant that my title wasn't strength and conditioning coach, because I wanted, again, semantics, and doesn't really matter too much, but I want to emphasize that there's
more to it.
And that even if my role is largely concerned with strength and conditioning principles, that the lens or the framework I'm putting that through is through a more holistic approach.
They really messed up when they named the field, didn't they? So, in relation to putting it to one sentence, could you put it into one sentence what you do if somebody asked that was completely oblivious to the world of the sports performance industry?
How do you mean? What's the question?
How would you define what you do in a sentence?
I think my role is to help manage the physical dimension to support team performance.
And initially that wasn't the case.
Probably I'd actually reframe that. It's probably understanding what team performance looks like for us and then managing the physical dimension to support that.
And how do you do that effectively? If you go in with a team for the first time, what are the questions that you ask of the organisation initially so that you're as effective as you can be in the role?
Well, I think the first thing to go is, and I didn't always do this, I think definitely my experiences of moving from the UK to the Rebels, when I didn't handle that transition particularly well, on reflection, has definitely helped shape how we do that now. I guess the first thing, especially when you come into an organisation like the Sydney Swans, is one, rather than rushing to have a performance impact, you spend time assessing the landscape and understanding how is this working here and what's working well. And it's a lot easier when you come into an organisation like the Swans. The Swans is historically a very successful organisation. Rarely, if ever, missed finals. I think missed finals 2 or 3 years out of the last 25 years. Had a very successful and stable athletic performance department and medical department before we arrived. We were a relatively new performance team. My predecessor, another Irishman, Mark Kilgannon, who's over at West Coast Eagles now, ran a very good program. So the first thing is coming in and not rushing to change things, is having a look around, spending time, seeing what's done well. Speaking to Killer was a great resource for me to, understand, why is he doing certain things? Talk to me about the players, talk to me about the environment, rather than it being a competition between, who's better.
My way now. I'm here.
Not that, which I've done in the past. I think some of the key things are, one, being present at training, being present at team meetings, so you start to get an appreciation of what the organisation and the team are trying to do, not just locking yourself in the S&C office or on the gym floor and worrying about that. I find engaging with the analysts or some of the technical analysts are some of the best ways to start having good conversations about the game and the game model and how we're trying to play with both with them and with the coaches. They obviously we've got an excellent kind of analytics team here with Reese and Zoe who run that department, and they're always willing to sit down and say, look, here's how we're trying to play the game, here's what we're doing, here are the stats or the KPIs that when we're performing well, these are what they look like. As soon as you start to get an understanding of what some of the nuances of how we play the game are, then you can have more informed conversations with coaches. Big one is engaging with the coaching staff. I think that was one of the key things I kind of emphasised when I was having discussions about coming up here, is that my goal is not for them to be better athletes, it's for them to be better football players. And being an athlete is only part of that. It's, I think when you mention the word athlete, it references the physical dimension, whereas a football player has to balance a number of things. And what I'm interested in them is being as good a football player as they can rather than as good an athlete as they can. And of course that will involve...
You're going to change your title again?
Yeah, change it again. Of course that involves physical work, but that's not the outcome. And then engaging the players, obviously, that's... I think, there's obviously a lot of IP, football IP and environmental IP in the players, and they're ultimately the ones that you need to get on board really, and to understand what they need and also what they want, so you can understand where they're coming from too. So engaging the stakeholders is definitely a big part of it, and not rushing into having a performance impact, but assessing the landscape.
That probably sounds like quite a big job, quite a daunting experience for young coaches coming into a new sport. How aggressive was your learning curve when you first came in to, say, work with the Swans and Aussie rules, because you had that rugby background? And then in terms of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where do you think you find yourself now in terms of your understanding of the game?
In some ways, I think it helps coming in from another environment. I think what's for another sport as well. So I think one of the advantages of me coming into the Swans is, one, I provide external reference for the program here, but then also the program provides external reference for me, where we're providing external reference from each other. And while you try to be open-minded and seek, I think as a profession generally we're full of people who are, seeking PD opportunities and to get into different environments, but there's no substitute from being in a completely different, in a different environment with a different set of problems. And, I've been in kind of 3 rugby programs, and although I would like to think I went into at least 2 of them open-mindedly, you still have probably preconceptions or you have some cognitive bias around how things should run in a rugby program. When I come into a footy program, especially a really successful one like the Swans, there's no preconception of how things should be done, really. So I actually think that helps to a certain extent.
You come in keen to listen first, probably.
Not coming in and I think probably when you've been in the industry for a while, you probably have a certain amount of buy-in and credibility just because you've been in it for a while. But certainly I wasn't coming in with, this guy's been in a lot of successful footy programs and understands footy really well. That wasn't the selling point. The second thing, and I kind of referenced, I was going to finish the presentations that I've done recently on in terms of Dunning-Kruger effect reference. There's a economist, Johnny Wheeler, has this quote, as the island of our knowledge grows, so too do the shores of our ignorance. Is that now I realise the more I know, that highlights the more you don't know. It's such especially when you start to frame things through this kind of systems thinking lens, you realise the interdependency of everything. It's infinite, really, the interdependent nature of the environments that we're working in. But getting more comfortable with that level of uncertainty, getting more comfortable with the fact that you can't quantify and measure everything, I think helps with that as well.
I was listening to Alan Murdoch on the Athletes Authority podcast this morning, actually, and he was talking about a conversation he had with Eddie Jones, and he asked Eddie how he could be a more effective coach for developing game speed in rugby union, and Eddie said, could you come up into the coach's box and keep up with us technical, tactical coaches talking about the game and understand everything that's said? And Alan responded saying, probably not. And he said, well, that's number 1. And we had a good conversation a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago actually now, around tactical periodization, if you remember. And that is something you covered in the presentation. That's something that I don't think sports science or strength and conditioning graduates are often taught. It's something that you potentially have to go and seek out understanding yourself with. But I think maybe when you break it down in that way, because it's so systemized, it's a little bit simpler for the S&C coaches or athletic development coaches to understand. When was it you came across that? Was that from other coaches in rugby union, or was that from your own learning? And how effective has that been in you applying and understanding each individual sport a little bit better?
Yeah. I said I was already kind of questioning my practice and how I best support football programs anyway. And I would say exposure to tactical periodization principles is what opened the kind of door to me to systems thinking. And tactical periodization is littered with systems thinking principles. It's very intertwined. Essentially, it talks about the interaction of technical, tactical, physical, psychological at all periods of time, understanding the game model, that it's not that these things are, interdependent and interconnected and influence each other, and that we need to be training these things all the time, which are very much principles of systems thinking. My first kind of exposure to that really in a formal sense was through Bryce Kavanagh, who was head of performance at the Rebels when I joined. He's at Chelsea now. He was kind of, those tactical periodization principles had been in professional football for a long time, which is obviously a highly tactical sport. And yeah, those were starting to permeate through the kind of rugby community, primarily through probably Eddie Jones at the time, around that 2015 period when Japan had upset South Africa in the World Cup. And actually that was a bit of a pivotal moment for me anyway. I remember watching that game. I obviously worked in rugby for a long time and enjoyed playing the game. I remember watching that game. We talk a lot about game demands, sports demands, and I watched that South Africa Japan game, and the way rugby union has been going for a number of years, it's almost becoming more American footballized, where it's about set piece and kicking, and essentially Japan, yeah, exactly, and Japan basically beat a superior opposition there by not playing the game that way, doing it a different way. And it kind of highlighted to me that we talk a lot about, we use the term game demands, but really the game has rules. It's how you play it that has the demands, or how it's imposing. That's what has the demands. So I guess seeing that exposure through Bryce, and then Dean Benton in particular, and my time with the Wallabies, the tactical periodization principles were influenced what we did there. And again, it just was complementing my own evolving thought process of a focus on the interconnectedness and the interdependence of these different components, rather than just get them fit, get them fast, get them strong. It's how can we do this in a manner that we know is supporting
the overall picture,
game style, etc.
Obviously, that's still very systemized and very focused on the game, but there are soft skills as a coach and you have to develop as well.
Yeah, it is. And actually, just on the systemized, I think when I think sometimes when you say that systemize, it makes it sound like it's quite controllable and measurable. I actually think the systems thinking concept, one of the main, and same with tactical periodization, really, has been comfortable embracing the bits that you can't quantify and can't control. I guess it's not a system in terms of it's not a production line. Like, it's not Toyota factory. There's a system there of how they produce a car, and it's very complicated, but it's not complex. And what you have with these systems is they're complex. I probably worth maybe drawing a distinction between these. I always use in the presentations, I use the measure of like complicated. Something like a Formula One car is complicated. That's a complicated piece of machinery, but it's governed by the rules, by the principles of engineering and laws of physics. It's reproducible. Although it's really complicated, it's reproducible. When you take that same Formula One car and you put it in a race with 17 other cars, and you put a driver in each one, and you put them on a different track, and you put weather conditions and team principles and fans, that's complex. That's a complex system. And there's too many inputs there to reduce them to, simple numbers or simple equations. It's not formulaic. So although we say system, it doesn't mean the human body's a system. It's a highly complex, really highly interactive. It doesn't mean everything's quantifiable, even though it's systemic. So I think that's being comfortable a little bit in appreciating the chaos, and that you can't measure everything is an important part.
So if you can't measure everything, has how you determine your effectiveness or your success as an athletic development coach changed at all?
Yeah, I think, and look, I don't want to say like we take a lot of objective data all the time. As I said, I'm not being dismissive of kind of those more disciplinary components. We have guys they're on the force plates every week, they're on NOR boards every week, we're tracking strength numbers every week.
It's not to say that that's not important.
Yeah, it definitely is important. But I had an interesting conversation with our outgoing GM where, we produce kind of a report on their physical status quarterly. And I presented, I handed out to all the coaches and playing staff, give them a snapshot of where they are. And our GM at the time was like, oh, this could be a good measure of like KPIs for your role. Our guys are improving. And I said, and Charlie Gardner he's a great thinker, but former player too, great appreciation of kind of holistic performance. But I said to him, like, if you make these my KPIs, then that's encouraging me to focus on influencing these numbers as opposed to making smart decisions about
what the overall picture
is. So again, that comes down, I think, to being, as I said, I view the role as optimizing rather than maximizing.
And how did he respond to that, actually?
Yeah, he was, I said he's a good thinker about performance anyway. I think he definitely did understand that.
And without giving away too much, like, did you find a resolution to that? And was it a simple one?
Yeah, well, I'm just comfortable in saying I just don't view my role as to maximize these numbers. That's not to say there's not individuals in that list and the things that we're not trying to improve on certain metrics that we think might influence their ability to play the game at more regularly and be more resilient. But it's not the primary focus. The focus is them being better players as opposed to being better athletes. So in terms of how do I evaluate my role, I guess I'm just more comfortable in yeah, I'm more comfortable in not being able to quantify everything and not being able to put that down to that I'm doing my role well because
The numbers are up.
the numbers are up. Yeah.
The numbers are up, but we're on the bottom of the ladder.
Well, exactly. And so, and that's hard. I think you have to be I'm fortunate to be, and it's not always the case, but I think that would be, you probably couldn't work in every organization like that. It probably makes it a bit more selective where you might be able to work because if you felt like you're under pressure to justify your role in terms of objective outputs, then I'd probably think with the way I view the role, I probably wouldn't be best suited to an environment like that. Yeah. But I think when you're dealing with such complexity, is that in a way like better decisions rather than better outcomes in terms of those athletic performance markers are what constitute doing a good job to me. Am I making the right decisions as opposed to are all these numbers going up?
Yeah. Are the decisions that I'm making in line with the values and goals of the organisation, I suppose, and each individual player? You said on, I think, the Athletes Authority podcast that one of your strengths you determined from potentially your time at Leicester Tigers was connecting with athletes and having the soft skills around understanding the environment. Was that always the case? Was it because of that early experience with Leicester? And what would be your main advice to young coaches that are going into a new environment to try to develop those softer skills that you can't learn in a textbook?
I think, because to be honest, at the start when you go into an organisation, like you're not contributing on technical knowledge. Like that's not where you're going to be. I think I worked hard and was probably a good fit for the organisation. But no one's going, geez, this guy is, he's 1 year in, but he's the best strength and conditioning coach in wherever, Europe, England. So that
they probably say Europe in England anyway. It's the best one to be there.
But that's just not where you're going to be add value. I think there's a couple of things. One, obviously, probably predominantly a Irish audience listening to this. I think that's probably something like we're quite a social group of people. Maybe it's the way we grew up, where you're, I don't know, storytelling, and you spend a lot of time indoors and with your friends, and there's a lot of those innate personality characteristics are kind of nurtured through the way that we maybe grew up. Maybe I spent my youth in team sport environments and probably understand the how those environments work. And I think that's what you find too when you work at the elite level of sport, is like actually the people are the same, they're just better at the sport, but it's the same. You're going to be, if you go 30 lads down at GA training on a Tuesday night, you're going to have the same personalities at Tuesday morning at Sydney Swans. Just the abilities might be different, so I think that definitely helps. But I think I recently did my ASCA level 3, and a big focus of that is on like the kind of management. I spend a lot of time on managing self and knowing your own strength and weaknesses. I think I probably have naturally a bit of a more extroverted personality, which maybe, or at least can utilize that. I'm not afraid to get up in front of a group, and I think I can be. I think probably one of the skill sets I have is I can influence and change the energy of a session or a group if I need to. I think that's probably something that has helped me. In terms of how you develop those things, I think I think exposure to coaching at any level is like really important there. I reflect when I was at UCC and poor student, I spent my summers doing summer camps, coaching summer camps for Munster Rugby, and even just like coaching big groups of kids. Like I don't know, the things would be they'd be scattered around. You say last one in has to do 5 push-ups.
You have to do that with the adults sometimes too.
Well, you do the same thing. I'll do the same thing. We're trying to get their attention at Sydney Swans training, and everyone's turning around and
harder
running in. So I think there might be some innate personality or environmental characteristics that help shape that, but I also think it's a trainable skill, and the more exposure you have to coaching at any level is going to help you nurture those skills.
You can put yourself in the environment essentially, and then try to have the environment shape you a little bit.
Yeah.
But you touched on there, like you've always been, or you are quite good at getting up and speaking and controlling the energy of a group, as well as presenting in front of a group. So at the start of the conversation, you said you had been reluctant previously to kind of present your system. Why was that, and what have you gained from going and doing the few presentations that you have so far, and is it something that you're going to seek out in the future?
Yeah, well, I think it's been comfortable. I don't think I have a system really. Is the that is the system almost. It's the idea of it being, if someone asked me now what's my kind of philosophical approach to going into an environment, it would be just to try and understand. My approach is to try and understand their philosophy so I can help support that. I don't think it's
not concrete.
No, and I also don't think it's one of those things you hear in kind of strength conditioning while you go, I don't know, I often think if you had a sore wisdom tooth and you go to the dentist and you go, my tooth's sore, and you go, well, here's my philosophy on removing wisdom teeth. I'd be like, I'm not interested in what your philosophy is. Like, can you please just do what's best for this? I feel like in strength conditioning sometimes we have, and again, I think it's in the pursuit of being progressive, but it's a supportive role. You don't need an independent philosophy. I think your job is to
support everything.
Support something else. That's the role. So I think there's probably, as you spend more time, you get more comfortable. I'm okay now not having the answers. I'm okay. The academic process has been really good to me, because part of that, as I mentioned earlier, is part of the reflection and growth there is actually seeking criticism. So even, through that process, and I've got a great supervisory team, and Dr. Locke James is my primary supervisor. It was like one of the things he mentions to me, when you present, people often say like, thank you questions. And one of the things I always finish is like, not critique it. I think what happens in a lot of these things, people come up and they go, oh, that was really good, took this, took that. And I'm like, no, if you disagree with something, or something didn't resonate, or you've got a different view, like that's, like, we don't want this kind of group think. I need to have the right answer. You need to agree with me, and then we all carry on. So whatever lies is probably part of that personal development or professional growth is actually putting it out there and seeking criticism, and probably getting outside your. Oftentimes, I said that that group think approach is, although I'd like to have a pretty good network of people, the reason they're kind of in your network is sometimes you're quite aligned on your thought process. So when you go into something like speaking in front of a group where you don't know 90% of the room, I think part of the advantage there is being, what can I learn from this? Not, you're obviously giving some information away, but it's reciprocal, and hopefully you're getting some critique and feedback back to help evolve your process or your thought process further.
So, as I said earlier, you've said maybe quite a few times, and then to use the anecdote that you used there about the wisdom tooth, like that doctor giving you his philosophy that maybe he takes him out, maybe he leaves it in, maybe he treats it in a different way. I would imagine getting across the understanding that multiple answers can be correct for the same problem may be difficult for coaches that are new to the industry, or maybe some interns. How do you get them around to that point of view, and is that point of view ever met with any frustration when you can't give them a concrete answer to what the best thing to do is?
Yeah, I think in the employed environment, there's a pretty good understanding that there's multiple ways to do it. Like I think in the actual, when you're sitting in meetings with coaches or with the medical team and you're discussing who should do what drill, who should be available at what time, who's in and out of training, who does what in the gym, it's rare that there's an absolute answer there. So I think the actual practical application of that is probably less hard than what you think, because especially when I guess the advantage of where I'm at is, when you're sitting down in a room, that there's a lot of expertise there. There's guys who've been in the game for a long time, from a coaching or medical perspective, have good experience, and it's the collaboration and again the interdependency of the information and the skill sets that we're bringing that leads you to maybe the most appropriate answer or an answer at least. I feel like when you're starting out, there probably is a pressure to feel like, you
I know the answer.
I know the answer, and you need to be able to contribute. But I know for me personally, a red flag is probably the wrong term because it's probably part of the evolutionary process. But when I speak to someone now and they're very sure on something, that's when I go, I don't know if I believe you, because there's,
You haven't explored other answers.
as I said, you're dealing with, you're taking, and if we're having discussions about a player, you're taking a complex being. They're, interacting in a game or a training situation, or, which is complex again, and all the interactions then, and then they're operating this complex social system that is this team. You go, there's just not going to be one answer there. There's obviously multiple ways of doing it. And I think practically that's probably maybe sounds a bit more complex there in terms of its application than what it actually is. But I think at least at this level, you have people who have, good technical knowledge, good experience, good intuition. I think intuition gets kind of it's easy to be dismissive of intuition, but, you have people who've seen or experienced different scenarios, and then that's being challenged by the external reference of other people who've come from different environments when we're in here, and that leads you to have a discussion about what is one or the most appropriate solution out of a couple. I feel like that's the way it actually happens in most applied environments, and you probably feel more pressure earlier on in your career when someone asks you something and you feel like you need to be more sure.
There is one person that'll ask you something that will want an immediate and complete answer, and that's the athlete themselves, especially younger athletes. How do you navigate that when they're asking you for what's the best exercise for X? What's the best food to eat at X time? What's the best way to get the best night's sleep ever?
Yeah. I still find a lot of the time I'll ask them what they think. I'd say, of course, there's obviously a balance to be struck there. I think, players need to know that you either have the information, have an opinion on something, or at a minimum are able to say, I'll need to seek, I'm not sure of this, but I will seek out the answer to it and come back to you. But I still think the same thing applies there, where there's probably multifaceted in terms of what, on a lot of the questions that they might ask. If it's something to do with, training modification, or do you think I should do this or do that? I'm like, what do you think, Matt? How do you feel? Maybe we do it today, or maybe we're off doing it on Friday when you've got through the full training week, and we'll do it afterwards and see how you pull up. And I often feel like there's a bit of discussion back and forth there too, rather than another absolute answer. And there's obviously certain aspects where you go, they ask when should I have my protein shake, or when I should do recovery, and this is why I think we should do it at this time. But I think there's more discussion there with players too. I said they've got a lot of knowledge. If they've got especially some of our players here, we've signed 3 players in the off season who've been around premiership winning teams, or 31, 32 years of age. Those are guys who go, I think I can add value to those guys and we can have a conversation. But to think, that you don't have good innate knowledge of what you should maybe be doing, or that we can't have a conversation about a back and forth to find a solution, I think would be naive. So I think it's the same with the players also, to be honest. Again, I think you have the expertise in the in the physical dimension, but it's still about the interrelationships and interactions and the interdependencies. So it's rare that you're talking about something completely in isolation. So there's probably a conversation there with the player as well.
And the system with which you find an answer is probably the same, but other than those older players, like the age profile of the squad is relatively young, I think you said to me. So do the questions vary quite significantly between the younger players and the older players?
Yeah. I actually think I find some of the blokes who've been around the game for the longest, in a way, have kind of they've probably gone through the same evolution as I have, where they're probably out of that Dunning-Kruger effect too. And I think they're often the guys who are more receptive to having a conversation about why we're doing something at a certain time. Why do you think we should do this? Here's why. Okay, that makes sense. They've probably gone through the same evolution as probably we all do. But just going back on the, it's looking for absolute answers actually quickly. I reckon, one of the, Glenn Stewart, he was head of performance at West Coast Eagles here in the AFL for years, 20 odd years. And he's quite interested in these systems thinking principles too. And one of his kind of guidelines is that when you're in these kind of complex scenarios is that, they're not, rules don't really fit. It's not like it's heuristics and guidelines are the things that need to be more like flexible and adaptable. So I think where I said about having the conversations with athletes there is like it's rare, I think, that there's absolute rules, but there are heuristics and like guidelines that allow you to frame those discussions. Here's when I think you should do recovery. Here's why I think you should do this modality. Here's why I think you should do it at this time. Player comes back with something else. We have a discussion on it. It's not a.
You're not dictating anything.
I mean, don't get me wrong. We set it up. There is it's not anarchy in here either, where things are all do it all ends and random. But
you're given options.
It's an adaptable environment. It has to be, because there's a lot of inputs. But yeah, I find we've got a young group, but I find the older players they've probably gone through that evolution where they've got a bit of an idea of I said they've got good knowledge of maybe potentially what works for them and what's been good in other environments. And I'll also seek out that information. So we get players from I know I've been in good programs and good clubs. Be like, hey, what was good down there? Like, tell me, what are we doing? What can we do better? What are they doing? What are we doing better? But I often find those guys are maybe more sure. Come back to that Johnny Wheeler cohort. They've got good knowledge. They're also aware that there's a lot more probably that they haven't been exposed to, the same evolutions I've gone through.
So, in a way, are the younger players they're more moldable, both from a positive sense and in a dangerous sense as well?
Well, I think the nature of society and players is changing. One of the interesting things about being a coach in this environment, when I started, I was 23, 24, and you're the same age or younger than the players. You're watching the same TV shows, you're going to the same bars, you're out on a Saturday night. And one of the funny things about working in these environments is, you keep getting older and players stay the same age, and there's definitely, I remember when I started my career, one of the first players I ever looked after as an intern was Julian White, who won a World Cup with England in 2003. And so I was 23, 24. This guy was like 36, 37. He was part-time sheep farming at the time. And I'd meet him at 5 a.m. on 3 mornings a week. And he was of that generation where it would literally be, tell me what to lift, tell me where to run, tell me how long to rest. He would literally do exactly what I told him to do. And here's a guy, I couldn't have been more green, and this guy couldn't have done more in the game at the time. But that's the kind of, generation of the player. That's the sort of player that grew up in that generation, which is probably similar to what, when I was growing up, you kind of
unchallenged, just do it.
Put your head down, get the work done. Whereas I think what you're seeing now is you have players who are probably more inquisitive, want answers, but want dialogue, want a back and forth, are also being influenced by, between, guys are training at, have, independent coaches in their off seasons, they're talking to other players of their clubs, they're on Instagram, there's a bit more nuance. I think that approach of, dialogue and understanding the interconnections is even more important with this generation, because you could be sure. But when I started, you could just tell people what to do, essentially. Maybe that's where it fit my more reductionist approach, because that's what players were looking for too a little bit. But that's also changing, so you have to evolve with that.
We've had quite a philosophical conversation till now, which people will enjoy. I think they come to the podcast for that generally. But there's been very little specifics about practical application.
Yeah.
And I know in the presentation that you were given for play, you were talking about the percentage time investment that's given to each, say, physical quality, and the percentage impact it has on the overall success of the group. And if you were to go searching on Instagram or on social media or YouTube or whatever of late, people would think that 95% of your program is speed, power and coordination, I would say. why is it that that stuff is just presented on social media? Is it because it just looks more attractive, more nuanced, more interesting? And then just to clarify for the young coaches that see that, how much time investment as a percentage of your athletic development program does that take up? And how much do you think it impacts if you could put a numerical value on it? You can give us a range, because I know it's going to be hard for you to give us a specific.
Answer to the first bit, I think it's definitely what makes the social media clips is the transfer and the stuff that kind of looks a bit like footy or is a bit sexier. I guess in answer to what that looks like, I think again it's probably not a hard and fast, because it's not. I always think it's not my program. It's my understanding of what best supports this team at this time at this program. So you could go somewhere else and it's a different environment, different sport, and it could be different again. I kind of on these presentations I always highlight this tweet that the tweet kind of says, for all the talk about sports specificity, 85% of what I do is across sports is the same. I think it's a American collegiate S&C coach who had it up, who's probably dealing with multiple sports, and it's sprints, hinge, lunge, squat, whatever the usuals, and
what can fit in a tweet.
And I read that and I completely agree with that. I go, if you came in to watch the Sydney Swans, or you went to Sydney FC or football, or you go across to the Roosters in rugby league, and there's going to be a lot of commonalities there. People are going to be running fast. They're going to be doing some lower body strength. They're going to be doing some hamstring work. So that 85% is, I agree with that comment about it being common and consistent across sports. And the reason for that is that's well researched. It's well supported. There's decades of applied application of those principles that have been proven successful. But I think the nuance then is understanding the 10 or 15%, which is appropriate to your environment and what you're doing. So, if I go somewhere else tomorrow, I think we'll be going there. Will be some hamstring work. We'll be doing some pushing, pulling, traditional strength conditioning work. But the 10 or 15%, when they go 85% is common, I think that undervalues what the 10 or 15% is. Like, that's, I think, what makes your interpretation of that and your application of that to the context that you're working in is what makes you appropriate for, or your understanding of the role in that organization. That's why I think when places lose practitioners, I think that's what you're losing. The reality is that there's no doubt that you could come in and take my role at the Swans and have like the technical knowledge and come in, but what the organization is losing, at least for a period, is you're losing someone who understands the context and has been through the team meetings and understands what the organization is trying to do. And I think that's why that's the real hit for organizations when good people leave.
And you're upsetting the flow and direction if you do that too as well, because
that's it. And the reality is, like, I'm not if my job went up tomorrow, you'd get 700 applicants and people would do a great job. It's not like I'm not highly talented or special or a unique snowflake in terms of what we're doing. But what I do have, because I've been here for a couple of years, is now I understand the context and the environment and what I'm working in.
And you understand the players.
And the players, exactly. And I think that's the important bit. So in answer to your question, the fundamentals probably do make up 80-85%. The coordination,
if we can call it that.
Yeah, coordination, the speed, the power components, the understanding of, I mentioned about understanding the tactical vision and then the technical actions that underpin that, and every technical action has an underpinning physical component. Us understanding that, working with the coaches to develop a technical model about what best practice looks like around some of these technical actions, breaking down the physical components, then trying to train those components in whatever warm-ups and speed sessions and in the gym. That's probably the bit that tends to make the social media clips, because it's a bit more nuanced. But yeah, I said 85% the program that probably remains true. You're not going to see, that's not the entirety of the program here, at least.
But we spoke about as well that 15% where you're trying to break down, not even, that's probably simplifying it too much, but you're breaking down the more complex into its component parts and then building back up. So the coordination aspect of it, the guys that might not necessarily love the gym, when they do that, sometimes they're like, oh, deadly.
Well, I think that's one of the key messages we what I say is I actually, and if we take the gym as an example, this is what I mean about I'm not really concerned with how good they are in the gym. I'm interested in their football performance. And I tell the guys, the gym sessions, and I think this has been well received by the players, because I think everything we do in the gym, as an example, is tied into how we're trying to play the game. And so everything's related back to football. Nothing stands in isolation. Because you're a player, you're not just an athlete. You're an athlete as part of it, but you're a player. And some of that is really obvious. Probably the stuff that ends up making social media clips. You see someone dropping their body height with an aqua bag, and you go, oh yeah, that's related to the contest or whatever else. But even like on the more, in terms of guiding training prescription, and I'll give an example of this, and you might agree or not agree with the prescription or why they have chosen this exercise, but I'd probably encourage you, if you listen to this, it's more the thought process in terms of supporting the game. So we're a very good pressure team, right? We're pressure in footy is like pressing. We're a really good running based team. That's one of our skills. That's one of the highlights, or one of the key aspects of how we play the game. So I think, okay, strength is important for our guys, but we want to maintain our running ability. So go, okay, we probably don't want to be shifting, although we want guys to have good lower body strength. We don't want to be increasing lower body musculature. We don't want too much hypertrophy of their lower body. We don't want to be shifting pennation angles in terms of muscle physiology, which is potentially affecting contraction time and affecting running ability. All right, so what's the best exercise what's an appropriate exercise that we can choose, and not what's the best exercise? So we trap bar a lot of our guys, right? And the reason we trap bar our guys is because we can get a good neural strength stimulus in there, but we've chosen an exercise that doesn't have the same mechanical load because you don't have the same eccentric loading on it. Now, whether you agree with that in terms of exercise selection, it's more the thought process of going, what are we trying to do as a team? What are some of the KPIs which support how we're trying to play the game from a technical, tactical perspective, and then how best can we support them from a physical perspective? And for me, then something like a trap bar for a real running base player is going, okay, that seems to fit in terms of influencing strength without potentially working against the muscle functionality that'll work against the running action. So I think some of the stuff that looks kind of sexy and nuanced and coordination based tends to make the cliffs, but it's more the thought process of supporting team performance is the thing that helps influence the decisions, rather than I'm a coordination based guy, or I'm a Olympic lifting guy, or I'm a West Side barbell guy, whatever it is.
And we'll clip out the bit where you said best as well. But I think the people that listen to that intently and still disagree with your exercise selection there, like, I don't know if you're going to change their opinion anyway, because you've just selected trap bar deadlift, as you said, but it might not have been a trap bar deadlift. It could
have been something else. Yeah, it's working from the game backwards as opposed to working from the intervention to the game is essentially the thought process.
So we'll finish off on the quickfire questions. The first one is proudest achievement to date.
Oh wow, I've been fortunate to be it's funny, this is my 14th year, and I said I've been to won grand finals with Leicester. I've finished bottom of the table in Super Rugby with Melbourne Rebels. I've worked in Northern Hemisphere, I've worked in Southern Hemisphere, I've done domestic, I've done experience international sport, and I've worked across codes. And probably the one moment I'm proud that I've got to have this kind of a multitude of experiences. I think when I was starting out, if I thought I would have got some of those opportunities and experiences, I would have been pretty happy. So I'm from a professional perspective.
Yeah, don't worry, your wife is going to listen.
Yeah, I was going to say, my two girls probably my proudest, but professionally, probably just the range of experiences I've been fortunate to have so far.
Favorite athlete of all time?
Oh wow, we had a guy. He's in Japan now. His name's Sean McMahon. Played for the Wallabies a bit. He's at Suntory, Sun Goliath now, and great bloke, but like insane. I've never met someone who has a higher tolerance for pain and discomfort than him. And probably the best individual performance I've ever seen by someone was by him against the Queensland Reds in our first or second season at Super Rugby. But what I really liked about him was he was kind of one of those guys that was challenging. He was trained unbelievably hard, played unbelievably hard. I would say was pretty loose off the field, and probably gave me that appreciation of helped reinforce that these guys are players and not just athletes. You know, it's not an input-output sport where you go
work hard, play hard.
Yeah, it's there's more to it. But he's probably one of my favorite blokes in terms of the balance. Well, no, the balance is probably too loose for me. But his tolerance for discomfort and ability to just keep backing up was pretty impressive.
An extremist. What's the biggest thing you've learned in the last 12 months?
I said I probably put myself out there a little bit more since COVID, and then in terms of doing podcasts or public speaking, and what I found is, like, you kind of referenced some of my some of my presentations and some of the podcasts I've done, is that the more you share, the more exposed you are to people, the more feedback you get, and the more that helps your growth. So I think, as I said, I'd been reluctant to do that. That's not the way I was educated. When I started, it was about keep your head down, don't put your head above the parapet. And I've
say nothing to no one.
And then I guess not that I do it in search of growing my profile, but I think when you're putting your ideas out there, you get a fair bit back to help drive that professional development as well.
And as you said, and as the whole presentation pointed out, I suppose nobody has all the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, wow. I think, it's a difficult industry to break into and stay in. From a professional perspective, I guess I've always been, quite committed and disciplined. And I think those, I'd say, stick to that process. I've never been, it sounds, but obviously you kind of get into strength conditioning because you love sport, and probably all of us are like not very good at it really, like, or okay. But I think one of the things I had when I was 18 was a willingness to like keep coming back, even when I wasn't the best at something, or come back, and that's probably served me pretty well. So stick to that path. I think that's been pretty good. I also got my first time I ever got a job, actually, I got really, really drunk at the Christmas party. And I'd recommend don't do that. When you get to 23 and you get your first job, don't get really drunk at the Christmas party.
Both very good pieces of advice. Shane, thanks a million for coming on.
Great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for spending the time.